This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 180.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Ehrmann, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with another fantastic conversation and a fantastic educator. I had the opportunity of speaking with Heather Smith tonight, who is the North Carolina Teacher of the Year. She brought energy, she brought insight, she brought emotion, and she brought instructional strategies to our conversation. We really dive into what it means to be an empowering educator, how to connect with our students, and how to develop those foundational relationships, not only with our students, but with the community at large, and really understanding the community that you're teaching in. And we really dive deep into instructional strategies that she's seeing as she tours the state and works with different teachers, as well as she liked to put it, nerding out to some math as well. So we really dive deep into foundational math instruction that can be beneficial to experience in elementary school that will have profound impact on middle school math instruction as well. So this is a really well-rounded conversation, as always, when we have amazing guests like Heather. So I really don't want to talk here any longer by myself. I want to jump right into our conversation with Heather Smith. Hi, Heather. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. I'm really excited for this conversation. So please officially introduce yourself. Let our audience know where you are coming from and give us a snapshot of your career in education.
So I am Heather Smith, and I'm the 2024 Burroughs Welcome Fund North Carolina Teacher of the Year. And I live in a very small town called Waynesville, North Carolina, which is in the western part of the state. So it's a very small rural community. And I'm a middle school teacher. I actually started in elementary education, and I'm 6 foot tall. So elementary school students relate your age to your height. So I was like I was like the oldest person in the building. So I had to move to middle school where they like understood my humor. But no, I found a love for math education, and most importantly, like finding ways to make math really fun and really relevant for students. And so, I met my husband at a BT meeting. Like we're like this total like power couple that teaches in the same school. He teaches 6th grade math. I teach 8th grade math. So my journey to education was definitely rooted in me forever. I always knew I wanted to be an educator because of the great educators that I had. But finding my way to middle school was definitely a really fun journey. And I would never go back. I love it so much. So yeah.
So I'm gonna play a little game with you.
Okay.
What did you teach in elementary school?
Well, I taught 5th grade. Fifth
Okay.
grade.
And
I started in 2nd grade as an interim position, and I cried every day.
So 5th grade was the last year before middle school?
Yes.
Okay. So you said you would never go back. You have to go back. You find out next year you're going back to 5th grade. So let me ask a couple more questions about middle school, 45-ish minute periods.
We actually have 60-minute classes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes.
That's nice. So I want to talk about that. But all right. So you're going back to elementary school. You have to teach every subject. You have a self-contained 5th grade class. What experiences and what expertise and knowledge have you built up as a middle school teacher that you think would serve extremely well in facilitating your elementary class more effectively than you did in the past, and would give you a perspective to offer your colleagues that they might not think about as career-long self-contained elementary teachers?
So one of the things that I think is cool is that because of my experiences as an elementary educator, it shaped me into the middle school teacher that I am today. So like making sure that my kids are not afraid to use manipulatives in eighth grade, right? Like we're using hands-on materials. We don't have to stray away from those things. So I would think it was like definitely a connection of what I knew about the foundational skills that my students need, applying that to middle school and then bringing that back, right? But most importantly, if I could think about going back, the advice that I would give to teachers is like, we need longer planning for our elementary school teachers. And that was one of the reasons I left, right? If I am required to teach every single subject area and be an expert in every single area, I need more time to plan for that, right? Because I go home, I'm a mom, and how am I supposed to be this expert in everything? So if I could bring advice back, it's like, let's share time to make sure that we all have enough time to plan. Because if we have to be wonderful at every little thing, it makes it really difficult. I don't know if I answered your question, but what I would say is like taking my experiences in elementary school, applying it because middle schoolers are like elementary schoolers, right? And bringing that back and saying that like our foundational skills and the things that our elementary school teachers are doing are just out of this world. And if we can extend that into the middle school, then I think our kids are going to be so much more successful.
Definitely. I would agree with that. And it is a challenge. And so my career was mostly in fifth grade before becoming a STEM teacher and then an instructional coach. So it is a challenge planning for all of the different subjects in elementary school. So thinking about math more specifically now, what do you think, because again, elementary teachers, we'll just go with the age old phrase of jack of all trades, not an expert of any. So what do you think is missing, maybe from even just focusing on fourth and fifth grade math, but if you want to go lower, that's fine as well. What do you think is missing in the way students learn math, or the way teachers use or don't use vocabulary or build number sense or understanding of operations? What do you think is missing that could be solved relatively easy with effective and appropriate professional development for elementary teachers to change the way they teach math slightly? That would have profound effects on middle school math for students once they hit algebra and they hit these different, higher level math skills that they're learning.
So you're speaking my language. Oh, like my heart is in ensuring that our students see math in their everyday life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that they walk outside and they're like, oh, this is what Miss Smith taught me in the classroom. And I think, and I'm not trying to, because please know, like my background's in elementary education. I think that because the expectation is that you teach everything, that a lot of our elementary educators don't see themselves as like strong math educators, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
I would agree. And they're not trained for math specifically. Right. So like you said, it's not like we're degrading anything. It's just, I think at times, and teachers, I've found they love the times that they have the opportunity to learn from experts to think about the specific contents more. So please continue.
So I think that it all comes back to this, making sure that we know what the end game is, right? Like if at the end of all of this, my eighth graders are expected to understand the systems of the systems of equations, right? And being able to connect that. Well, what got me there? And I think that our fourth and fifth grade educators, is so valuable for them to understand that, like, what is dividing fractions? What is that work that we're doing? And when we create these models of breaking it down and seeing those conceptual pieces of what we're actually creating, like these little pieces, and us putting, and like when I look at 4/5, right? I'm looking at that these 4 pieces don't make up that whole in that fraction, right? And so I think that one of the best ways to ensure that our educators in the lower elementary grade, first, they need to become confident in understanding what they're teaching by knowing where they're supposed to go. Like math is not a scary thing, right? I think we need to, as math professionals, need to provide our educators with these really cool foundational ways of being able to see it in different ways, because a lot of us in our own educational experience, like learned procedurally. So I know that 2x plus 5 equals 7. I've got to subtract the 5. I got to divide by 2. But what does it really mean? And so when we can provide that like conceptual understanding and that connection to what we're actually teaching, then the procedure makes so much sense. And so I think it comes back to one, giving our teachers the confidence to know that it's not scary. It's actually really fun when you can relate
Mhm.
it to having that vertical alignment of seeing like, where am I going? Where am I progressing? What is it that I can do in fourth grade to ensure that my fifth grade teachers feel supported and knowing that this all connects, right? And then providing multiple examples of that conceptual piece to the procedural piece, and they see that, man, this actually does connect. There's so much that we can provide. And like I said, bringing out those little things like manipulatives or models so that teachers can physically see it happening and be able to relate that to their students. Because our kids are so cool in understanding things when they can see it or physically do something. Yeah, sorry, I get like real like sweaty when we talk about math because it's so
No,
cool, right?
I love it. My background, so like I said, elementary, but I minored in math to be certified for middle school math. So teaching math is one of my passions by a long shot. And I loved when I was able to teach fifth grade math. And I think my experience and knowledge in what middle school math looks like definitely helped at times. And just, like when I would teach them, when we would look at adding decimals, right? Numbers with decimals, so not whole numbers, I would explain to them that I'm not going to teach them anything new. They already know how to do this. We just need to reframe the way we approach it. And, I even joke around like you were taught how to add wrong because your teacher told you to start in the ones column, and that was wrong. You start in the lowest place value. And as long as you do that, the procedure is exactly the same. And so even, like shifting the way vocabulary is used, I think is really important for math coordinators or supervisors to look at that K to 12, right? Because it might be really difficult for an elementary teacher to understand the skills that they're teaching and how it has an impact on a student's understanding of solving equations. But if they understand that it's really important that you talk about lowest place value versus the ones column, like that's something that they can connect more with in how they deliver instruction. I would always say groupings instead of parentheses, and just say like, you're going to see other groupings in the future. And I would just kind of draw what they look, here's like a fraction. A fraction technically has hidden groupings on the numerator and denominator. And I would end it at that, but I would just use that phrasing instead of PEMDAS. I used GEMDAS. Like I used the word groupings instead. Division is a fraction problem, like little things like that, right?
And being able to relate it to like ratios when
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing with a like a colon in between 2 to 3, like relating that to a fraction or knowing, and it's going to make like improper fractions and mixed numbers makes so much more sense when they
Mm-hmm.
see it as a division problem. And I think that that's where it comes from, right? Like we have to relate all these things together because our kids are exposed to it actually at a really early age. It's just making sure that they understand that connection, right? Oh man, yeah.
Yeah. And you were talking too about like conceptualizing it first. Like I would really, as much as I possibly could with skills that we learned, I would set up experiences where the students would find patterns to discover the rule, right? Like how do you add fractions, right? It's adding the numerators and not the denominator. But I would set up activities where they would see that result happening and come to the conclusion themselves. And then I'd say, okay, here's a shortcut, right? Here's the fast way to do it. But I would always remind them that I'm teaching you to find the patterns, because when you forget the shortcut, you can figure the pattern out again and you'll say, oh, right, like this is the fast way to do it. But if you forget the shortcut and you don't have a conceptual understanding, you have nothing to fall back on. You don't have that math mind, that confidence in math. And that was something that I would love your advice on, as well as what are strategies that you use to eliminate the math anxiety that is real, right? I realized that early in my career, and I did a little bit of reading with it to understand, because I didn't experience it, but math anxiety is real. And I really wanted to eliminate that as much as possible with my students. So do you have any advice in supporting your students with that?
So absolutely. So it's really it's sad, right? Like we can go around and we can easily say like I'm not a math person. But the first time you say like I don't know how to read, people are like, "Oh my goodness, that's the worst thing you can ever say." But like we can't have that, right? Like we have to know that every kid is able to do math. So one of the things that I start off every year at the beginning of my like we come into the classroom, I use like a deck of cards. And first of all, I randomly group my kids because a lot of the times our middle school math classes are leveled, right? Which is kind of hard too. Cause like, oh, well, I'm in the advanced math class, but really like all of us have room to grow, or
Hmm.
kids that may be struggling in an inclusion class and they realize it right early on. And so one of the things I do is I randomly group my students and we do non-curricular activities. So I do this thing called 1 to 100. It's a piece of paper. I would love to share it with you, but it's a piece of paper. You give them 2 minutes and you flip over the paper, and one partner is searching for the odd numbers. So they start with 1 and they have like a blue highlighter. And the other partner is looking for all the even numbers. So do you need any math skill whatsoever? Absolutely not. And so what we do is we flip it over really quick. I'm looking for 1, this person's looking for 2, then I go back and I look for 3. And while they're doing this in those 2 minutes, you take pictures of them and they have no clue that you're taking pictures of them. And so you airdrop it to the screen, and at the end of the 2 minutes, you give them a second, you give them a new piece of paper and they try it again. And they're like going and they're so excited. And after that second time you show these pictures and they're like, "You took pictures of me while I was doing stuff?" And I'm like, "You had no clue." And this starts this conversation of you're in a math class and you were fully engaged. You were fully invested. You're showing me what it looks like to work in a partner group. You're showing me what it looks like to be helpful to someone else because you saw the number that they were supposed to find. And in this moment, you were more confident than you had ever been in a math classroom because it had nothing to do with math, but it really did. It had numbers, it had patterns, right? So then you narrow it back down and you tell them like look at your paper and see the colors, and they start to see that the even numbers are in the quadrants that are opposite to each other, and the odd numbers. So it's a pattern, and they like didn't even know that it's like going
Hmm.
clockwise, and they find it. And so that's the first thing I do. I create this environment where it's like everybody can do math. I have pictures to prove it, right? You were so engaged. You thought it was the best fun that we've ever had, right? And so fully engaged, having the best time. And then what I start to do is when we answer questions in class, I start to put their name with it, right? Like, hey, Billy made the point that this was the correct answer. Man, Billy really got this. And I leave that name. And so they're starting to see this positive identity that one, Miss Smith sees me and she sees that I don't normally answer questions, but the one time I did, she wrote it on the board and it was correct. And your middle schoolers like love it, right?
Hmm.
So that's what I do. I create this environment where it's like, hey, I really know how to do math, even though they're not really doing math, right?
Hmm.
And hey, I'm going to put identity to that and saying that this is a positive thing that I see. So I'm more willing to make a mistake because Miss Smith's going to be like, whatever, it's cool. Or I'm more willing to answer questions. And so when you create this safe space, you give them the ability to fail and it's okay. And so that's another thing that I do. I have this data wall in my classroom and it's exposed for everyone to see. And it's this accountability model of us looking and saying, hey, I noticed that you did really, really good on this. Can you help me with that? And it starts to have this accountability that we're really positively minded mathematicians in the classroom, and making that connection of like, hey, I can be fully invested. Miss Smith wants me to be fully invested. I'm going to do everything I can to show her. And then the last thing I do is I celebrate the failures. Like I purposely, in my station activities, I always have an error analysis. This kid solved the problem wrong. Let's figure out how we solved it wrong. I always purposely, not always on purpose, make mistakes myself. And I'm like, oh, darn. And then I would get like really mad, like, I can't believe you guys didn't tell me that I made a mistake. And they're like, well, we knew it, but we didn't know if we could tell you. And I'm like, no, right? Failure is awesome. So I think those are the things that I do. I try to make sure that they have this environment where they feel like failure is a really cool thing because Miss Smith does it all the time. We're also looking at other kids that fail all the time through error analysis and how we can work backwards to figure it out, but also tying their name on the board in front of everybody that they made a really good decision on their math skills and that they can see themselves as mathematicians. So I'd love to show that 1 to 100. It's so fun because they also have like expressions that you can do. So as you get like further into it,
Mhm.
8th grade curriculum is all about like exponents. So instead of partner 2 finding the number 8, it would be 2 to the 3rd power. So they have to like, think about it. So it creates this like we're getting collectively harder and we can work together to help each other out.
Yeah, please share that because we can attach that to what we post out for this episode. As you were talking about that, I love that number idea. I love the pinning their name on the board. I think that's a fantastic idea. It was kind of the opposite of the first lesson I would do every year with my 5th graders. And I came up with this the first day I was a teacher, kind of on the fly. I really don't remember where I came up with the idea, and I used it every time I ever taught 5th grade math for the rest of my career. And the first day I would ask them to create a question that was easy enough for a kindergartner to solve, but challenging for a senior in high school. So any student K-12 should be able to solve it, but it also should be appropriately challenging for any student K-12. So they would spend 15 minutes working in groups trying to come up with all these different math problems and, using like operations that they don't even know, but they've seen before. And then like, I would say like, okay, like, that looks really challenging, but can a 5-year-old solve that? And they're like, oh, and so they scribbled out and then they come up with something really simple. I'm like, okay, yeah, a kindergartner can solve that, but is that going to be hard for a senior? So they would all share their ideas. And I would just simply, I would write the word why on the board with a question mark. I'm like, this is the question that solves this problem. Every kindergartner through 12th grader can answer the question why, but it's also usually really hard to answer why in math. And I would explain, like, I don't want you to just know what we're doing, but I want you to know why we're doing it, so you have a deeper understanding of it. And so I would then say, I'm going to prove to you how hard this is. So I would put a problem up on the board. It was usually multi-digit adding, like a 3-digit number plus a 3-digit number, or 3-digit plus 2 digits, something like that. And I would just say to them, raise your hand if you can solve that, because I know 5th graders can solve this problem. So they would solve it on their paper, and then I would ask a volunteer to come up and explain it on the board. And as soon as they would write the numbers on top of each other, I would stop them and say, why did you do that? And they usually would say, my teacher taught me to do this. Yeah. And then, so I would try to promote them, right? They wouldn't be able to answer. I said, call in a friend. So they would pick somebody, they would come up, they would try to explain why maybe they could, they couldn't, they call another. So more and more people come up. Then eventually someone says, because you have to line up the place values. I would say, okay, great, continue the problem. And then they would start to add the ones. Why'd you do that? So it would take, a half hour for them to not solve this. And usually almost the entire class is standing at the front trying to answer this question of why. So it hits home this idea of like, I really want them to understand what we're doing. But here's where you and I are opposite. I say, you've all now been wrong. So just let go of the fear of being wrong. You're going to be wrong a lot this year. Embrace it. We're going to learn from the wrong. So it's the opposite of you encouraging them on that first day, but
that's
same idea.
That is so powerful. Like I'm sitting here thinking about, challenging my 8th graders to do that. And because they often want to know the why, like, why do I have to do this? When am I ever going to use this in my life? Right. Like the age old question of like, what's the point of this? Right. And so to be able to start that out, that's so powerful. I really like that. I'm going to use it when I get back in the classroom.
Feel free to use it at any time. It's a great first day activity, or it's a great, you just gave a test on Thursday and it's now Friday and you don't want to start the unit day. So it's a good filler too. So I'm from Pennsylvania. So when I was a kid, North Carolina, the entire state was at the beach in my mindset until I became older and realized that it stretches very far west. Yeah. So are you from the area that you teach in, or?
So I'm originally from Virginia,
okay,
but I went to college. I got a softball scholarship at Western Carolina University. So
okay.
I found myself in Cullowhee, North Carolina, which is in the mountains, but my husband is born and raised in Waynesville, North Carolina. So I have a lot of ties through family there. But through this year, I've had the wonderful experience. Like our state is known for from Murphy to Manio, from the mountains to the coast. And it is so diverse. And it is so unique in the way that it does stretch across. And so I've officially been to a school in Murphy and a school in Manio. And that was like one of my things that I really wanted to do. Like I wanted to go to the furthest point west, which is still 2 hours from where I am, and the furthest point on the East Coast in Dare County, which was really cool.
So how do you see the the geographic outlook and just the demographic of communities? How do you see that impacts the way schools operate, the way students and parents operate in a school district? And what advice would you have for new teachers that are possibly moving to an area they're not familiar with to kind of think about that? And what can they do to help, prepare their mindset for just understanding the culture and the area that they're teaching in?
So I'm going to speak to that because I'm so thankful that you asked that question, because Western North Carolina has experienced a lot of tragedy lately with Hurricane Helene, and it's all over the news and stuff like that. So we had counties. I actually was in Mitchell County last week, and they're just east of us. They're still in Western North Carolina. And that was the first day that they have had a full day back since the hurricane hit. But here's the thing, Ken.
And that's 4 months ago?
Yeah, September 27th was when it hit. So this has been between hurricane. We also experienced lots of winter weather, but it has a lot to do too with the traffic of really large trucks that are like bringing in and getting rid of debris. So they had to change their bus route schedules to be able to get there. But Ken, here's the thing that I realized. Schools mean so much to our communities, and our communities mean so much to our schools. And here's the most powerful thing that I've experienced this year, and I hope I don't get emotional saying this, is like being a teacher in Western North Carolina has been the most heartwarming thing, because like when everything else was shut down, our schools were open, feeding kids, providing and being a distribution center to so many. It's still, right? Like actually being shelters for over hundreds of people, for like all of these electric companies and the disaster relief. And it's like everything else was shut down. Everything else was closed, but our schools were open. And the number one priority of every one of those schools was, we're going to contact every single one of our students to make sure they're okay. And it was like we had no communication for a week. We had no cell phone service. We had no internet connection. There's nothing. And so we had families that the district office had like printouts of addresses, and we had, principals and teachers going and knocking on doors. I got to meet a teacher last week who learned how to drive a forklift. And so if I had any advice, when you move to a new area, when you think of places that you're going to go, you have to realize how important the schools mean to the community and how much the community means to the school, because I think we often forget that, right? Like we are fostering these young people that are going to be wonderful humans of society in our communities, right? And so 80% of North Carolina is like rural. It's like you've got these big cities, right? But most of North Carolina looks like my little town in Western North Carolina. And most of them are like us in the sense of schools are the livelihoods. They're going to be that economic driver, right? Like what you're teaching them in the field of STEM is going to be so relevant to what they're doing in our communities. It goes along with our community colleges too. Like we have so many kids that come out of Haywood County schools that have already received a 2-year degree or know for a fact that I'm going to go into the welding program and make more than you make, Miss Smith, right? And so if I had any advice for a new teacher moving to an area, look at how important the schools mean to that community. Because if you're going to be fully invested, my sweet babies, my own personal kids are going to go through Haywood County schools. They're going to be products of those public schools. And I know without a doubt that they're going to be better humans because of the way that the community invests in them and the way that we invest in the community. So this is like my proud moment of, I'm thankful that people now know that. I'm thankful that people see that our educators, they didn't stop working. They weren't required to go to school, but they didn't stop working. Our community just reached out in a way. But not only our community, we had school counselors from all over the state come into our communities and help support our kids in their mental health. Like, it just is this outpouring of support that if it weren't for our public schools in North Carolina, then like we wouldn't be thriving, right? And so that's the advice that I have. Like, when you go into that community, when you see that your community is fully invested in the school system and the school system is fully invested in that community, you know you're in the right place and you know that you found home.
I couldn't agree with that more. And you mentioned guidance counselors. I would say those are one of your school may or may not have social workers as well, but guidance counselors are a great resource to talk to, especially as a new teacher, to learn more about your community, learn more about the students that need the support the most. I would say as a new teacher, I didn't pay attention, or I wasn't aware enough of students in my school that were struggling economically as much as they were, and just being aware of, who's on free and reduced lunch, or, what is the family dynamic that each kid in your class is going home to, and what does their home life look like? Are they going to, a two-parent home, a one-parent home? Are they going to two homes because it's mom's at one, dad's at another? Are they living with grandmom or an aunt? Or just knowing that and having that understanding of the kids in your class is beyond important, because you have to remember that everything that they leave with from you happens at home. I'm not a big homework person, but they're what they're bringing home. If you're asking them to do something at home, you should be aware of what is the home that they're doing it in. And then every morning they're coming to you, they're bringing everything from that home, right? Whether it's positive or negative. And so do you have any other strategies for getting to know your students like that, or resources that you have at school to help you understand more about your students on that home side of who they are?
Well, I think one of the things is I think personally, when the kids walk into my classroom, and here's a unique piece about Western North Carolina as well. Everybody knows everybody, right? That's how it feels. But you don't often know what your students are going home to. So one of the things that I do is I try every day, whether it's a check-in or whatever we do, like asking the silly questions. I actually stopped asking, like, what are you doing this weekend? Right? Because a lot of them didn't want to tell me what they were doing, or they didn't have cool adventures that they got to go on compared to everyone else. But I always do the camping game. Have you ever done that? Like, my name's Heather, and on my camping trip, I'm going to bring like a ham sandwich, and I tell them like, I love food, and I like try to connect it to that. So we do like little silly things like that. But one of the big things that we do is we're very closely connected to our elementary schools at the middle school. So we actually have these trips where our elementary schools come up to our middle schools. And so we're able to make this connection of like understanding their family and where they've come from. But it's just getting to know your kids on a personal level, but also providing this safe space where they're like, I can talk to my teacher about anything. And just having this open communication with the other teachers on the hallway about like, hey, do you know? And I think that like naturally we feel like teachers do that, but you have to be intentional about it. And we're fortunate in our county that every single kid has no cost breakfast and lunch. So we can't like go based on their status there. One really cool place to do it is in the car line. You'd be surprised on how these kids show up to school, right? Like whether you're showing up in a BMW or whether you're showing up in something like I drive, right? And you're seeing the experience of what they're coming into, right? Like sometimes the kids open the door and like all this trash falls out. Or sometimes you see like this lack of communication between the parents and you can tell like, man, this is a really tough situation. So I think it's like being actively involved in going out into the community and seeing them where they are. So going to sporting events, seeing how they get home, seeing what they're interested in, like finding different things that they can do. It's all about being intentional because we think as teachers like, oh, I'm going to form relationships, but it's like you have to be intentional about knowing. And I think that relationship with your guidance counselor is so important because they have this wealth of knowledge that we don't often have.
Yeah, the forming relationships, like you said, the intentionality is so key because you can be present and you can engage in conversations with your kids every day. But if you're not being intentional with what you talk about or who you talk to, things are going to slip through the cracks. And I would often I would have some sort of checklist on my desk with just a list of names. And I would have, different ones for different things, but I would have one focused on personal conversations. And I would just put a check mark next to the kid's name when I had any type of personal conversation with them. It could have been 5 seconds, it could have been 5 minutes, but they knew that I was engaged with them, completely focused on them and completely focused on me. And so then I could look at that list and say, you know what, I haven't talked to Caden in a while or at all. Or, he's got one check mark and everybody else has 3 or 4. So today I'm going to make sure that I give Caden eye contact and I talk to him, even if it's just for 5 seconds. And so that's that intentionality piece. You're not being less personal or less authentic with the students. You're just holding yourself accountable because as a middle school teacher, you have 100, 120 different kids. So it's impossible for you to just rely on, being a good person to make sure you're having that personal time with each student and that personal conversation.
And I think it's like utilizing every moment, right? Like, and being aware. So I think a lot of the time, like I've had a lot of trauma-informed training, which has been super helpful, especially now. I had that before, pre-Helene, and it's been so important now that I have it. It's like even knowing that a kid putting up their hood doesn't mean that like they're this bad kid, right? Like that might be their way of coping, and like understanding that like, hey, when that hood comes on, something's going on. Like being aware of like when your kids aren't at school. So I love that. Like I've seen a lot of teachers use their attendance every day to ask like, would you rather questions, and just making sure that they know that you're having that. But like passing in the hallway or being outside of your door. And even if it's not the kid walking into your classroom and it's a kid that you see that that you have maybe fourth core that sometimes doesn't like to show up, having that conversation in the hallway. Lunchtime. I know it's really hard for teachers, right? Because it's like the one time when nobody's like, Miss Smith, Miss Smith, Miss Smith. But like sitting with them at lunch, like you really figure out your kids when you sit at lunch because they become like these weird humans, right? That say all the stuff and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you said that, right? But like, don't just sit at the teacher table and like be antisocial to your kids. Like they want to have conversations with you, right? So I think not only just being intentional within your classroom, but being intentional outside of the classroom. Like I said, letting them see you in spaces that aren't the classroom. And even if you feel like you can't connect, like I'm a super big athletic person, and I had a student in my class who I was like, I don't know, you worry that you can't connect with them. You can find something each and every day that you can connect with your student. This child spoke very little, but he was very much into theater. And he invited me to one of his plays. He had the most incredible singing voice that I had ever heard. But from that moment on of when I went to that play, for the rest of the year, we had full-on conversations where, because he saw me as somebody that was invested in him, not just in an 8th grade math classroom, but in something that he really enjoyed, it changed our relationship forever. And him knowing that I really cared about him.
Yeah, and we've mentioned this before in previous episodes. Going to that theater event is not just that does not just strengthen your relationship with him, but it strengthens your relationship with every kid that found out that you went.
Oh,
right?
God.
Because they say like, oh, wow, like I can't believe Miss Smith went to that. And sometimes it'll prompt them saying, well, are you going to come to this for me or that? And the reality is one, you're not going to go to every student's everything.
Right.
2, try to choose things where there's a lot of them, right? So you get credit for being there for a lot of them. But it just kids knowing that you're doing that has a profound effect on your relationships with others. Same with the cafeteria. Like, even if you just did it like once a month and you talk to 2 tables, you're not going to talk to every student, but the other students see you there. They see you engaging socially. So it doesn't, in those moments where you're doing that extra effort, it's not necessarily that you have to engage with each kid outside of your class, but doing it with kids outside of your class just makes you more real and more authentic. And they just appreciate that even more. The other thing that I was thinking earlier about learning your district is, especially if you're not from the area, drive the entire boundary of your school. Like, drive the neighborhoods, ask someone that's from the area to give you a map of where to go, because you will, especially if you have a diversity in demographics, which you probably do, you'll just get a better understanding of where when you see the different neighborhoods. And the school that I was at, I drove the same way in, the same way out every day for 7 years. And honestly, not until I became an instructional coach and I drive from building to building every day, I understood the full scope of all the neighborhoods that were in my first elementary school. And the ones that I passed the same way in, the same way out are not the ones that are on the other side of the school that I didn't drive. And so just that is eye-opening to see where the kids are coming from and where they're going home to.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that has been most beneficial to me, being in a really large county, we have this like intense rivalry between the two sides of town, right? Like football rivalry that we have. But it's also like our county was so huge, and there's this area of our county called Fines Creek that is so far away that the turnaround after the hurricane, you have to go into Tennessee and come back. It's like that close, right? Like our county is so far widespread that there's kids that like could technically go to Tennessee and be so much closer there, but it's closer to do that. But one of the things that has been so beneficial, and I'm so thankful that you said that, is I think that we create this idea of what we're teaching and who we're teaching. And I think that I almost created this idea of what North Carolina looks like. Before becoming state teacher of the year, I had like all these, nobody understands what we go through here in Western North Carolina. And I didn't realize that the eastern part of our state struggles with the same things that we struggle with, right? Like being economically disadvantaged. It's just flat. You can see your dog running away for like 2 days there, right? Not in the mountains, but like over there. And so that's one of the things that has been like so shocking to me, is that even though like we have kids that go through the exact same thing, there's like really powerful educators that are there doing the work each and every day with the kids that they have in front of them. And it amazes me the things that they're doing. I went to this high school in Greene County, which is on the other side, and it's a STEM school of distinction. And it's one of the oldest high schools. When you look at the diversity of the school, right? And on the outside looking in, you think, man, this is a really diverse school. And they're doing some amazing things. I met this girl, her name is Alba, and she built a boat out of water bottles in her physics class. And I'm like, what? Like, that is incredible, right? Like the things that we're able to do with very little just shows the power of these educators and what they want to provide for their students when they really don't have much, So that's been eye-opening for me, but the most rewarding thing, that it's like, I can't sit here and I say, don't forget about us in Western North Carolina, when there's people all the way on the east side, East Coast, that are going through the same things. And so I guess I didn't realize it. And that's that on my part, but so eye-opening and rewarding to know now.
Definitely. So in your experience having this opportunity to tour the state as teacher of the year, what are some instructional things that you've seen in classrooms that you're like, I'm stealing that, I'm stealing that, I'm stealing that when I go back to the classroom next year?
I have a list of so many things. So first of all, like, because of this year, and maybe this might be a whole nother conversation for another day, but like my math mind has like evolved with this idea of STEM. Our STEM education is so important and so valuable for our students. Giving our students, like, I'm all about real life experiences, and like that's what STEM educators get to do every day. So I've been to STEM school distinctions where I'm seeing this stuff in action. My naming sponsor, Burroughs Welcome Fund, has a STEM awardee conference that I went to, and it was just like the opportunities that our students are provided through the field of STEM is like so cool. And it's like everything that I want in my classroom can be like engaged in a STEM class, right? Relevant education, the connection between like this critical thinking and allowing our students to look at things from all different angles. So definitely, like, I have this newfound love for STEM. I'm actually going to go back to school to get my master's in STEM with a focus in math. And that's like where I'm gearing up, like STEM. Like I'm like so over worrying about test scores. I'm like, but you see these wonderful results from these test scores, right? Like they see that because kids are having these experiences, I get really excited about this. Like, so one, I've been to STEM school distinctions where kids are making boats and relating it to the physics, sitting in the boat in the water, and they're connecting it to a global issue because the country that they researched had excessive plastic waste. And so they are solving a global problem while also doing their physics, right? Like, how cool is that? But also like the intense engagement that I've seen in some of these classrooms. I went to this classroom in Martin County, and this teacher was like standing on her desk, and the way that the kids answered the question was that they would also stand on their desk if they knew the answer. And it's like I've never seen so many kids like so excited to learn. And it just gives you this like it's like rejuvenated power of like, oh my goodness, this is so cool. I can't wait to do this. So those are the two things, like definitely that I would take away from everything that I've learned this year is like providing our kids these like super awesome hands-on activities that connect to our curriculum, but also connect to the world around them. And not only the world around them, but the global world has been just like mind blowing, but also this like intense engagement of like having kids on desk, like doing the crazy stuff. Of course, with your high expectations, but just seeing that excitement in their eyes of like education matters to me. And it was so cool.
I love that. And STEM is a huge passion of mine. It was something that I was really into, especially teaching fifth grade. I actually moved into being an elementary STEM teacher before being a coach. One thing that I found really, I don't know if insightful is the right word, but just powerful was when someone opened my eyes to including empathy in your challenges versus just solving problems.
Wow.
And so, for example, like instead of creating something out of the materials you have, creating something out of the materials you have to help someone that has a disability, right? So like they don't have the ability to grip pencils because they don't have the strength in their hands for whatever reason. So like, how can you use these supplies to help solve that problem for that person? So it was just an interesting take on some of the things that we used to do. I'm going to challenge you here. This is going to be the last thing I ask you before we jump into our exit ticket. So you're back in your class next year teaching 8th grade math.
Okay.
You have this passion for STEM. What is a unit, a project, a lesson where you already know I'm not doing it this way. I'm doing it this way because we're going to utilize some of these STEM ideas that I've seen and I've learned.
I've thought about this because that's one thing. I go to these STEM conferences and I talk about it, and like, what does it matter if you talk about it if you don't have something that you can like physically give these teachers? Pythagorean theorem. Imagine this, okay? Every time you get a Pythagorean theorem problem, they're like, here's a house and you have a ladder leaning up against the house and all this stuff. Imagine building a house, right? Building the ladder, creating the shadow that the tree projects. I would totally teach Pythagorean theorem using STEM to help them like physically utilize the other things, right? And imagine tying that into empathy right now in Western North Carolina. Not only are you building this house where a ladder gets to go up on it, like how many people could you help that are homeless right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how cool would that be?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like super excited right now, but I would totally use it for Pythagorean theorem because that I have found that when you can connect STEM to things that don't really like click with them, like they're like, oh, a triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But when they can see the house and they can see the ladder leaned up against it and they wonder what the distance between the base of the house to the bottom of the ladder is, like that becomes real to them. Or it's a tree or a flagpole, right? And the flagpole, the sun shining down and it's creating the shadow. Like, what if you were able to create that light for that flagpole and they created that shadow and they were able to measure it? Because my favorite meme that I put up is it's like, when am I ever going to use this in life? And then it's like a picture of a kid walking through this cutout path instead of going around the sidewalk, and it's like kid also walking home, and they're using Pythagorean theorem because it's the shortest distance between 2 points. And I love what you said about the empathy and how you could tie that in. So Pythagorean theorem for sure. I think that, dude, we could build houses and build the ladders and think about how that could help somebody who's in need, but also like tied into our Pythagorean theorem lesson.
Definitely. I feel like you could somehow find a way to incorporate thinking about what's the best ladder size for, climbing a 2-story roof versus a 1-story roof, or what's the appropriate distance to space the ladder away. And then based on that, what is the best height to set the ladder to? So they think about, like, if it's too far away, it could fall down. If it's too close, it could easily lean backwards. I don't know if there's a way to figure that out. I mean, that would definitely involve some high level physics and thinking about that, but just another thing for them to think about in terms of like involving that more. So yeah, I like that. So we're going to transition into our exit ticket, which is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week.
Okay.
Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Oh, love them. I mean, we talked about it this whole time, right? Like, we know how important it is that a child walks into the building and knows that somebody cares about them. And that makes their experience, because when you show that you care about them, they're going to turn around and show you that they care about what you're teaching. But not only that, you can have hard conversations with them like, man, that was a really silly decision that you just made. But because you initially showed them that you love them and that you cared about them, I think that they're going to be really successful in what they do, because that extends even further. I'm the worst because I keep going, right? I love kids so much. But like, when you show them that you love them, you're fully invested in them, and you know that kid has to be fully engaged in your classroom. So it all continues this ripple effect, because I love you, because I know you as a child, and I know you on a personal level. I know that you have to be fully engaged, or you have to provide me the direct instruction, Miss Smith, because I can't do all this craziness that you're doing right now, right? But I know that about you because I initially showed you that I loved you.
Mm-hmm. I love you. And the students that are giving you behavior challenges, those are the students that you need to invest more time into. So what is the best advice you've ever received? It could be from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student.
The best advice that I've ever received is you can't be the teacher next door. You have to be uniquely you. Because when I go down the hallway and I'm like the youngest teacher on the hall, and I see this veteran educator who's been doing it for 30 years, right? And they're doing it, and you're like, how is it that they do that? And you try to be them, like, it makes your year that much difficult because you're trying to be something that you're not. When you realize that what you're doing in your classroom is important to you as a person, your kids are going to realize that it's you, right? Like, they're going to realize that Miss Smith is being unique and she's being real to who she is. And I can see that. But when you stop comparing yourself to somebody else, you start to see the value that you bring to the field, right? Like, I know that Heather Smith is not like the teacher down the hall, and that's okay. And I can learn from that teacher, and I can love that teacher, but I have to be myself, because myself is what got me here, right? Myself is what I know will fully invest in those kids. So you can't be the teacher down the hall. You got to be yourself.
I love that. We know how the school year goes in waves. There are days and weeks where we struggle to survive. Mm-hmm. What is something that you could say to a teacher in that moment to help them power up?
If I could say something to empower our teachers, it would definitely be to find a piece of gratitude every single day. Whether it is the smallest piece of gratitude, right? Like, my second grader finally opened their milk carton without asking for help. And it's like, yes, right? But finding that piece of gratitude, because when you can find those little pieces of gratitude, it reminds you of why you do what you do each and every day, right? Even if it is the smallest piece, if you can find one positive thing out of every day in that school building, it's going to start to become like more and more positive things, because it's not easy. It is the most difficult but most rewarding job in the entire world. But we have to remember to be thankful and find that gratitude to help us keep going.
That's great. I'm going to give a little shout out to my good friend, Suzanne Daly. She hosts the Teach Happier podcast. She has a Teach Happier book. It's all about gratitude, taking care of ourselves as teachers. So definitely check out, just Google search Teach Happier with Suzanne Daly. She's got great resources and great strategies. So it's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. This really hits on what you've been experiencing this year.
Yes.
What separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies?
Oh, what separates them from the other teachers?
Mm-hmm.
I think that they're like super excited to learn. I think a lot of the times as educators, we get into this mode of like, it's routine, it's super easy because I don't have to like really think about what's next, right? Like I already know because I've done it 800 times, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But in the same sense, you got to be willing to learn and try something new because our kids are different each year, right? Like I'm going to have a kid that has to have that innovation. But for me personally, I found that it is that innovation that has sparked joy in my life and joy into the thought of my classroom next year, right? Like the thought of like, look at these really cool activities. But it's also like knowing that there may be times where we're super innovative and we're going to fail, but we learn from those experiences to help us be better teachers. And so I think it comes back to the thing that separates them, those educators that are always searching for that innovative piece, is that they are willing to be better every day. And if I can show up and walk into that classroom and show my students that I want to be better for them each and every day, they're going to do the same in return. If Miss Smith is giving it her all and trying these new things and trying to be creative so that education is relevant to us, then I promise her that I'm going to do everything I can to be fully invested in what she wants to give us. So they just bring me joy. Thank you for being innovative. Thank you for trying new things, because it just motivates me to want to do that for my students as well.
Absolutely. So how can our audience connect with you or follow along with you in the future?
Oh, I have like 12 posts on the Instagram. No, I'm just kidding. I do. I have Twitter or X. I don't even know how to call it anymore. I have X and I have Instagram. One of the things that if I have this moment to share, I had this great opportunity to meet with an educator from South Carolina who actually works for Maxwell Leadership. And one of the things that she told me is that two things that teachers really value as they've gone around the state of all the states in the United States, they've realized that teachers want to be recognized and they want to be heard. And so one of the things that I hope to do with my teammates for the Regional Teachers of the Year is to create professional developments in the state of North Carolina where teachers have just that. They're recognized for the great work that they do, and they feel like they're being heard, because I have that seat on the State Board of Education where I am this voice for educators. So I know that that's personal to North Carolina, but I have social media. I'm always posting my travels and things like that. But I hope that through encouragement and through gratitude that we can get this work into where where teachers feel like they are, one, being recognized, and one, they're being heard. So I don't know my handles.
That's okay. You can give them to me later, and it'll all be linked in the show notes.
Okay.
Wherever you're watching or listening, you'll be able to click on it right there.
Okay.
So it's totally fine.
I didn't have social media before this. Like, can you believe that? And it like came out.
Can I give you some advice?
Yeah.
When you say "the" in front of Instagram, it makes you sound kind of old, or like you've never used it before, like the Facebook versus Facebook or the Instagram.
I said the Instagram. Did I say the Instagram?
Yeah.
We also have the Walmarts and the Belts. I think it's like a cultural thing too.
It might be. It might be. I have to be more aware of where I am and who I'm communicating with. So that's on me too.
We put S's on the end of stuff too. I've got the Instagrams, and there's multiples of them. No, I'll make sure that I don't.
That's all good. So Heather, thank you so much. This conversation was fantastic. It's very clear why you are your state teacher of the year. Your state is very lucky to have you. Your school district is very lucky to have you. And ultimately your students are very lucky to have you year in and year out. So thank you so much for this conversation. Great emotion, great content, great instructional strategies in here. Just an all around awesome conversation. So I really, really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for nerding out with me over math stuff. Like if we had this whole other podcast about data, I'm sure we would like be in this mode of like, yay, numbers. But most importantly, thank you for just elevating the field of education and allowing teachers to come on here and share their voice. Because like I said, teachers want to be heard. They want to share and they want to tap other educators and say, hey, what's your story? So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that. So to our listeners, thank you for listening once again. If you haven't, please share this podcast with a colleague or a friend for not only Heather's story, but the story of so many educators, so many Teacher of the Year winners as well. So thank you again, everyone. And Heather, you definitely left us feeling powered up after this episode. Have a great one. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.